Сен оған немене көп көйлейсің? Өзің де түсінбейсің бе? Азаннан кешке дейін телевизор көре берсек, қандай бизнес шақ келеді? Дұрыс қой әкеңдікі де. Автобус келе жатыр.
Muy buenas, un gusto estar con ustedes. Para mí es un auténtico privilegio estar acá con alguien que, bueno, por un lado tengo la suerte de ser su amigo, hace ya unos largos años, un encuentro muy extraño en el Abasto Cine durante un festival de cine independiente de Buenos Aires, el Bafisi, una ocasional conversación en torno a un filósofo estadounidense. Nos llevó a un encuentro frecuente, a veces en festivales, hasta construir una amistad con Ken Jones. Ken Jones, no lo digo yo, lo dicen muchas de las personas que lo han leído. Yo creo que es uno de los grandes críticos de cine que tiene la historia del cine. Digo tuvo porque últimamente escribe menos, lo sigue haciendo. Por ejemplo, hay una pieza extraordinaria que se publicó en el momento que murió Jean-Luc Godard en Sight and Sound. O sea que la capacidad, la lucidez de Kent sigue intacta. Por mucho tiempo Kent además fue el director del Festival de Cine de Nueva York. Por mucho tiempo también estuvo absolutamente en el corazón de una revista con la cual yo lo empecé a leer, que es Film Comment. Y además ha hecho cine, tiene un conjunto de películas a esta altura, está trabajando en su segundo largometraje de ficción. Hay una Cartas a Elia, es una película que codirigió con Martin Scorsese, con quien trabaja a menudo, es su colaborador. Tiene un fantástico film, Hitchcock Truffaut, que es una pieza muy hermosa. Y Diane es su primera película de ficción, que a mí me parece fascinante. Hay dos libros que son buenísimos de Kent. Uno es uno de mis favoritos en la materia, es un libro sobre Robert Bresson, Darezhan, El dinero, última película de Bresson, texto que está solamente en inglés y está publicado por el London Book el Instituto de Cine de Londres. Hay un libro que lo tengo en mis manos. Hay una versión en español de este libro editado en Chile. Quizás está casi agotado por ahí, pero está en español, esto es muy importante decir. Y esta es la versión en inglés, que acá se puede ver, The Physical Evidence. ¿Por qué está con nosotros Ken? Bueno, primero porque es una mente brillante y un corazón abierto. Pero en segundo lugar, porque este libro empieza con una dedicatoria. Es un libro que Ken podría haber dedicado a muchos cineastas que son sus cercanos, muchos, empezando por Scorsese. Sin embargo, el libro dice, tiene una dedicatoria, la dedicatoria es la siguiente. La dedicatoria del libro dice, por Darezhan Omirbayev, who still believes in cinema on the other side of the world. Para Darezhan Omirbayev, que todavía cree en el cine al otro lado del mundo. Este es un libro del 2007. Yo recuerdo haber leído una pieza extraordinaria de Ken sobre Omirbayev en Film Comment, y lo traigo acá porque si alguien le dedica un libro con todo lo que podría haber dedicado a Darezhan Omirbayev, es porque hay algo que él ha visto en el cineasta kazajo, y de eso es lo que vamos a hablar. Sorry, my dear friend, to have been a little bit rude in order to present yourself in another language, which is the Spanish. but now we
I'm
go
sorry that I can't speak. I'm sorry that I won't be speaking in Spanish.
No, come on, it's okay, it's fine. Thank you so much for your
I
time.
wrote that piece about Darezhan in Buenos Aires.
Oh yeah,
it was in Buenos Aires when I wrote that. Yeah.
the 2008. It's
Yes.
which is a title which has an echo towards Stan Brackett's film, because the Brackett film is act of, and yours is the art of looking at your eyes. No, it's like that. Yeah. Well, I wonder, first of all, I would like to know, Kent, how did you get to know Omirbayev work? Because usually what happens for not only in Argentina, in many places, is like, and in the United States is also a problem, even when you are living in New York, which is a little bit different than other cities. Chicago maybe is another place, Los Angeles maybe less, which is the access toward films which are not from Europe or certain countries from Asia. So this kind of isolationism that sometimes we don't have the whole map of cinema. So how do you get to know about Omirbayev films? Because it's interesting to know that.
Yeah, I mean, you know that some people have referred to Darezhan Omirbayev as the Kazakh Philippe Garel, right? I mean, that's for people who know Philippe Garel's films. And so the person who introduced me to Darezhan Omirbayev's films was Philippe Garel. I was at the Biennale for the first time in 1996. I think it was 95 or 96, and I interviewed Philippe. I was astonished that he was there. I was there because I had written an essay on Monty Hellman. That was another connection. I realized they knew each other. I don't even know how, from the past. And Philippe was talking about being on the jury in Venice, I believe, and walking out of one film after another. Maybe it was Locarno, I don't remember. But he said if he didn't like a film, he would just walk out of it, which is not a great idea if you're on the jury. But that was Philippe Garel. And he said, but I did see this film by this great filmmaker, and he took my pad that I carried with me, my little notebook, and he wrote in beautiful handwriting, Darezhan Omirbayev, Khairat, Cardiogramma, So the next year that I was at the Biennale, Alex Horvath, who was running it at the time, was actually showing those films, and I saw them and I was properly amazed. I got very interested in Kazakh cinema after that. And while there were many Kazakh filmmakers, and I visited Kazakhstan because I did a program of films quite a few years later from the former Central Asian republics. And while there were many filmmakers whose work I really admired, Darezhan's was something else. And that was when we met. And I'll never forget being at the local premiere in Almaty of The Road. And it was shown at the former Filmmakers Union, so it was after the end of the Soviet Union, so it had to be sold because they couldn't sustain it, the filmmakers. But they were still allowed to use it now and then. The film had its local premiere 3 years after it had been made. And after it was over, Darezhan was serving a tray full of little hot dogs and cheeses and things to people. And a woman went up to him with a bouquet of flowers, and she gave the bouquet of flowers to him, and she said, well, it was no masterpiece, but it was very sincere. Congratulations all the same. And he said, thank you. She said it in Russian. Of course, I had a friend of mine who was co-programming this thing with me, Oliver Lotsky, and she translated. And then after that, we had to clear out very quickly for the 6:00 wedding. But it was interesting to make contact with him, to meet the other Kazakh filmmakers as well, and to see his personality reflected as reflected in his films and as embodied in him as a person. And his films, I must say, were more accessible in the West, we'll call it, than the work of other filmmakers, because he had for a time a very strong French connection. Killer had a French co-production. Yeah. And I think he also, when I was there in Almaty, I attended the ceremony where he got the Chevalier des Arts et Lettres at the French embassy. That, of course, is gone now. That doesn't exist anymore. It's back to one viewer at a time.
You have to be quite amazed, not only at that moment when Philippe Gabriel wrote down the two, one of the first films he did, and then you saw them, and then you were absent. But then to dedicate a book to a filmmaker is truly a gesture. And I was wondering what makes you pick him, like I remember when I bought the book, and I said, oh, that is something, that it's a statement. So what do you think you get from him that maybe is not many other filmmakers?
That's an interesting question. I remember when he saw it, he was astonished, because we barely, it's not like, thank God for Google Translate, because we can correspond a little bit, but he really does not speak any English.
Yeah, no.
And and I really don't speak any Kazakh or Russian. And so I think that the answer to that question, I could just as well, I could, it's quite obvious from seeing his work that he knows the work of Robert Bresson inside and out. However, he's got a completely different orientation as an artist and as a human being, in every way. And somehow he, in the way that he works out scenes, he himself refers to it as mathematical calculation. He sees cinema as being very tied to mathematics, and geometry in particular, I suppose. He and his cameraman Boris Trushev. But I think that the way that he envisions scenes, the way that he works out interactions between people, the loneliness that he captures, not loneliness, solitude that he captures, the passage from alienated solitude to still lonely but enlightened solitude of someone who's on the path to being an artist, which for me is actually embodied most movingly in that last screening, and the passage where the boy goes to the screening, and you hear the words of Michel Houellebecq's words, and the transition from the older man to the boy leaving. That boy, does he do anything in particular that signals the fact that he is tuned into something, tuned into artistry, or tuned into imitating nature, as William Carlos Williams would put it, rather than copying it, so that you're imitating creation. It's embodied in his presence and in the mise en scène, and in the transition from the older man to the boy. And I found it moving, yes, but also deeply, deeply resonant, because this question of who's known in the West and who isn't always amounts to this ridiculous obsession with numbers, which now, of course, is at a frenzy in every area of life. or the way, not in every area of life, but in every area of the way that life is described commonly. It's thought of as a matter of numbers, of representation, of, how many people have you had an impact on? There's a ridiculous word that, comes up again and again in English. How impactful is it? It's not even a real word. And so the end of, my interaction with Philippe, who also has an extremely small audience, who once said, my audience is not an audience of the present, it's an audience of the future. I'm remembering something that, Woody Allen said, you affect one person at a time. And if 4 or 5 people, have been affected by a film, that's great. It's always one person at a time. It's always a one-to-one exchange. And so at the end of the last screening, in the middle of this alienated, environment, he can't even get into the screening until he drags 3 soldiers in because they need 5 people to actually start a screening and know that the cinema is going to be shutting down. It's filled with moving images that have absolutely zero to do with cinema. And then you never see the film that they're watching, but that's not the point. The boy is, sparked. And the old man sees something in the boy and realizes that it's being passed on without trying.
There is that.
That's
no. Oh, sorry. Sometimes because the connection, I don't know.
I know there's a delay.
There is that. This is a moment that is outstanding when the boy gets into the place, because on one hand, it's quite astonishing that he could have just bought 3 more tickets and not to bring anyone else, but the gesture is bring people beyond that he will pay. So there is just an ethical differences, because it's not a question of what I want. It is a question to share what I want. Then they got sleepy during the screening, which is, they are soldiers in a way. We can understand that, but I think that's something very on the core of how he perceives the world in certain ways. But there is that previous typical, I would say, Darezhan's settles, which is the whole sequence in the bus. That is amazing.
It's astonishing. And when you're, because that really deals, I must say that for some reason cinema has it's sort of what's the word that I'm looking for? It's kind of bounced away or veered away from confronting the reality of all these overlapping, solitary experiences that happen. If you go on the subway in New York on any given day of the week, 75%, 80%, 85% of the people in any subway car are going to be. And that's the way that the world is, but it's the way that he does it confronts it in a way that I don't think anybody, I think maybe Christian Mungiu and Christy Puyu try to look directly at it. Christian gets at it to a certain degree, and RMN, at a certain point within the middle of the movie, he really gives form to chaos. Christy does it in Sierra Nevada in a different kind of way. That has nothing to do with, phones and things. But I think that, with Darezhan does it so carefully, respectfully. His eye is so exacting in terms of photographing the exact nature of being when someone is alone with their own private entertainment, their own thoughts, or the recording that they're listening to that reflects on the world around them. And the world around them is there outside the bus, but it's through windows. And are they seeing? What are they seeing? What do when they're passing all those buildings? Are they looking at them? Well, you can't really look at them every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not that interesting to look at, and they also house things that are just not that interesting to think about, or not that enriching to think about. And what the way that he handles it, and again, this gets back to mathematics, is the way that it's edited, the way that the sound editing works in relation to the image. They're in counterpoint with each other, and then they kind of overlap and layer over each other, so that you really, it builds up a very, very moving sense of all these overlapping solitudes, I think.
Yeah, that is, and he has always done. There are always in Darezhan. There are moments in buses when you see that mysterious, paradoxical situation in which you are around a lot of people, but each one of them, in a way, they are an archipelago. You know, like they are like. There is no a sense of common ground, but they are just individuals, and he emphasized that idea of between individuals and lone or solitude, and it's something which is quite frequently. There is a fantastic moment in Poet that there is also the screening. There is a man there. He's traveling the train in this time. The main character. And the guy there is an old man watching an iPad. Then there is 2 or 3 girls that are playing with their hands with a sizer, stone, and paper. And then the mother is with the phone. And then because the kids are shouting at, or they're speaking loud, she gives the telephone, and the poet is looking all at that. So this mise-en-scène is outstanding. That kind of choreography.
Well, it's outstanding. Every moment of that film is outstanding. The shift from past to present and back are outstanding. But then and the sense of time from covering all that ground, but also that incredible scene where what is he, the mayor of the town? The guy invites him over to his house, and he just puts on, footage of his daughter's wedding, and it's sort of like all sitting there. Like nobody's really interested, including him, but it's like the thing to do. That's quite remarkable. And then also to return to this subject that we're discussing, when he goes to give his reading, only one person shows up, and it's probably his imagination, but it doesn't matter whether it's real or not. He makes contact with that person,
and then
it's meaningful.
And then can this opening, before the main conversation, which is philosophical more than important, is political important in Poet, what is being said in terms of languages, the idea that the languages are being lost, and everybody is like you and me now at this precise moment speaking in English, which is a lovely language, of course, but in the way that they put the problem, it's how this kind of lingua franca, it's absorbing all other languages in certain ways or imposed beyond that. But the presentation at the very beginning, what he's in the morning just writing, the movement of the camera and going outside and see the people who is selling the milk, for me, this open is just a sensibility you have to think about. It's nothing and all at the same time.
Well, but what he keeps returning to throughout his cinema is people lost in abstractions, and then the constant return to actual physical material reality and beauty, the beauty of light, the reality of light, giving someone a bouquet of flowers, mother in last screening looking at the light under her son's door, knowing that he's still awake, looking at his phone, at Instagram images of this girl that he's obsessed with. It's that's a constant in his work. And also there's just this back and forth between the urge to be, it's actually spelled out in that quote at the end of last screening. It's the urge to be among everyone else, popular. It's also there in that conversation in Poet with the guy who, it's been a while since I looked at it, but the man who, the old friend, right, who runs the cafe. Um, and it's, that's a very easy thing that a lot of people do. They kind of think, well, really, when all's said and done, I guess what I'll do is, you know, give in is too strong a word, but just kind of like, it's really about everybody as opposed to just me. But that's not the real equation. The real equation, what does your being tell you? And that tension is a constant in Darezhan's work from the start. And the brutal humor in his work, another thing that separates him from Bresson.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And also, there is that capacity. You said that in Poet you see that, like he goes back and forward over the history of the national poet and the resemblance and differences between this nowadays poet who works as a journalist. But there is also something which is typical from his films, and in Poet there are 2 or 3 extraordinary moments in which you have not realized meanwhile you are watching it, you don't realize that we are into the field of dreams. And then that is something outstanding, the misanavism that he usually uses in order to introduce this factor of dreams and desires. Sometimes it's not only dreams, desires, but you could be absolutely lost, and then you realize, okay, maybe it's a dream, maybe it's a thought. I think that is absolutely unique in his work. I don't know, how do you see it and how do you perceive it?
Well, I mean, it's present in other people's work, I suppose. But in his work, a lot of the time, he does it very skillfully, and he does it with the purpose of bringing dreams and reality together, showing how close they are, but then at the same time dramatizing this tension. There's that amazing moment in The Road when the filmmaker introduces his film to the packed theater, the lights go down, and a kung fu film starts. And he goes, a martial art film, and he goes, to the back of the theater and says to the projectionist, "Hey, what's going on?" And and then somebody says, "Well, they've decided to leave it on. They like this," and then you realize, and I suppose Fellini does it in 8.5, and does something similar in other films. But with Darezhan, it's always it's this question that's always face to face with art, that is articulated by the quote from Humbach at the end of the last screening. Do you have it in you to go on? As in where you're aimed at and what you're, in your solitary, being, and realize that it's not easy and it's kind of lonely. I was listening to an interview with James Taylor the other day, and he was talking about being a songwriter when he was an adolescent. And, the interviewer said, "What was it like for you in school?" And so he said, "Well, you can't be a writer and be the most popular kid in high school. It's impossible. It just doesn't work that way." And so, by the same token, you can't, be a writer or a filmmaker. You can be a kind of filmmaker, but you can't be a filmmaker as we, according to the terms that we're discussing. and be like, an Instagram star. I mean, it's yeah.
Just for ending, I was wondering, in Argentina, he's not well known.
Not well known anywhere. Not well known in Kazakhstan.
And in the United States?
Probably better known in Argentina than he is in Kazakhstan. I'd be willing to bet. He's not well known in the United States. If there's any country that he's reasonably well known in, it's probably France. But I don't really know about that for sure, because I think that there's such a pull right now towards, away from. When people say the word cinema, they don't all mean the same thing. And these days, a lot of the time, what they mean is something quite far from what we're discussing here.
Mm-hmm.
They're embarrassed to address the question of the art of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I must say that when I was younger, when I was growing up in the United States in the 70s, and all these people like Coppola and Martin Scorsese, and were making these extraordinary films, and that they were the films that were playing in movie theaters, we all thought, oh, well, that's the way that it's going to go on forever. And it turns out that it was just this kind of bubble. It had existed beforehand, but that was quite different, because in the industrial era of American filmmaking, artistry was abundant, but it was in dialogue with the demands of the moment. And I think that now, here and pretty much throughout the world, it's to the delight of people who want to make lots of money off of moving images and worldwide entertainment. They've figured out this strategy to just keep audiences like hooked with all of this stuff. It's an impulse that more or less started with Star Wars and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and continued and gone on and on and on. And I think that's all fine. I don't have a problem with it. I don't have to watch it, but I don't have a big problem with it. But I also think that in cinema, there's an unfortunate tendency to concentrate on numbers, and to think that the more people who know work, the better the artist is. Even for people who are unlikely to, you might think, are unlikely to believe that or espouse that, but somehow they feel that they have to. And I feel like anybody who takes the art of cinema seriously, particularly as seriously as Darezhan does, if there's a big audience, it's always going to be either a mistake or by chance or temporary or a happy accident, you know what I mean? And so it's always one person at a time, just the way it is for someone who's reading a Wallace Stevens poem. Wallace Stevens' work is never going to be like, was never going to be a bestseller. It's always transmitted one person at a time, and that's the way it is with Darezhan.
It is exactly how the moment in The Poet, when he goes to give the lecture and there's only one person,
right?
Which is an outstanding moment. My dear friend, I don't want to take more time from your daily activities. You cannot imagine how important it is for viewers, for cinephiles who really, really read what you have done in the couple of decades that you have written on cinema, and to see you, I think, for them, that you put such an attention to what Darezhan Omirbayev will maybe open up a new discovery for some, a rediscovery for others, and also probably a rethinking about what are the greatest masters nowadays. Sometimes we don't look where we should be looking, and there is one who lives in Almaty and whose name is Darezhan.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, you and I get to talk too infrequently, and it's always, joy for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, muchas gracias a todos por haber estado aquí con nosotros. Tenerlo aquí es un privilegio absoluto. Y bueno, muchas gracias. El festival ¿Está? Ahí estamos, nos reencontramos en las salas. Aquí hemos hablado con Ken Jones sobre la película de apertura y la de cierre, que es El poeta o poeta y la última función o la última proyección de Darezhan Omirbayev. Muchas gracias, hasta la próxima, adiós.